I've walked along fostering families who children are being reunified because the partner's in jail, or they can the mum generally has got the children back, so she because she's moving interstate,
Okay.
and when that happens, it's actually beautiful, and a
Mm.
carer gets to walk that journey.
Welcome to another edition of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. My name is Mark Powell, and my special guest with me today is Mary Dickins from Fostering Hope. Mary, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Now, Mary, this is Profiles in Christian Living, so I've got to ask you the first question. How did you yourself become a Christian?
So I became a Christian in my early 20s. So it was only after I got married and had my first child and had this um, moment of realizing my husband's friends had faith and there was something different about them. They had this peace that I didn't have. And so it was really just looking at them and their lives and the peace and the purpose they had in their life and thinking, I want some of that, really.
Mm.
And yeah, I think having a child, you begin to have those bigger life questions as well. So I had always grown up in a family where I'd say we were cultural Christians. So you went to church on Sundays, what you did, until sport took over, and then that went away. So I always grew up with those values of what it meant to be a Christian, but didn't actually have the relationship with God until, in my early 20s.
Yeah, that's fascinating you say that about sport because you and
Yeah.
I have a very similar journey.
Yeah.
We both had sporting scholarships in tennis
Yep.
to the United States to play on the college circuit. But that was a really great turning point for me, but it was a turn off for you.
Yeah.
Why is that?
So I went tennis scholarship. My first year I'd spent in Texas, and this is no offense to people in the south of America, but I found the Christianity the people I was at college with had a very Sunday faith and lived a very different lifestyle Monday to Saturday, and it just didn't make sense to me, and so it really put me off. It put me off Christianity and people who proclaimed one thing and lived a different way. It just didn't match in my mind. Yeah. So
Mm.
so I turned away from all of that and any thoughts of that really until I came back to Australia.
So you come back to Australia, you get married, you have your first child. It's fascinating because I think of Psalm 139, which talks about us being fearfully and wonderfully made.
Mm.
What do you think it is about? And because I know you're not alone in this, there's a
Yep.
lot of people, they have their first child and they're overawed with a sense of the transcendent
Yeah.
and of God. Why do you think that is from a personal perspective?
I think it's also this this can't be a mistake. This just can't all be luck or fate. There has to be a creator behind it. I think that was also a real feeling with having that first child, that there's 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 more to life than life and death, and it's just all a big coincidence, was a big thing for me.
Mm.
And I think that overwhelming love you have for your first child, which you don't experience in any other relationship. And so, where does that come from, and what does that mean? And it puts more meaning from reading the Bible or going to Sunday school of that God loves you until you actually feel that love that you have first child. I don't think even that helps it explain it more, I guess. Yeah.
Mm. That's an interesting segue because you come to faith around the time of having your own child. Um, uh, can you explain what was the process from going from there to actually getting involved in fostering children and then developing your own organization and ministry, Fostering Hope?
Yeah, so prior to becoming a Christian, my kind of life trajectory was going to be working in overseas development. Studied international law, and that's where my life was going.
Mm.
And so having my first child also put that on hold because that wasn't something I was going to do at that stage of life. So the fostering was really a way to do local mission. It was a way of saying, well, I can't go do that work overseas. What's something I can do here? What's something I can do with young children, that's this stage of life? And in a lot of ways, it wasn't a lot more thought process than that. Than this is my heart to care for the vulnerable, and this is something I can do here. Um, and so we began our fostering journey when my biological kids were 3 and 4. And so I kind of also felt like I had to have the parenting thing down packed a little bit, like, no, I could do it. And then the fostering journey began. Um, and we haven't looked back. So now we have 2 biological sons who are just turned 14 and 12, and 3 foster sons who are 8, 6 and 14.
Okay, so when you're fostering, and I think it's an amazing thing. My own sister was adopted.
Yeah.
I think adoption, fostering, it's one of the most beautiful human expressions of the gospel itself, what God does for us.
Yeah.
But I could imagine it would be incredibly challenging as well, bringing other children into your family. Was that, can you talk about some of the, maybe the joys and the challenges of
Yeah.
that?
Um, So I guess to take a step back, in Australia, the fostering is you have to go through a process to become a formal foster carer, and the process does prepare you to an extent. Through my work with Fostering Hope, and when we prepare Christians to think who are considering about fostering, we very much try and talk about how can you be a family for a child, not get a child for your family. So children removed are removed because of abuse or neglect, or at risk of abuse or neglect. So these are kids that really need love and need a family. Um, and if we think about it, a newborn child that we were talking about before, as humans, it's up until at least 2 years old, we're totally reliant on our mum or dad to do everything for us. And so if that mum or dad hasn't been able to provide that, that child grows up with neural pathways that develop differently in the brain. Their body functions differently because they haven't had the nutrition and care they need. And so you're opening your home to a child that has needs. I was listening to a podcast the other day that just said every foster carer should think of the child as having a disability to go into fostering with that mindset. Um, in one of the books we use, we talk about the beauty and brokenness that collide. So the joy of having our little two entered our home from birth. And so I get to hold them as a newborn baby, but knowing their mum can't do that.
Mm,
And so there's this absolute privilege in being that person that that little baby is totally reliant on, and being able to be in that position of mum, which is such a treasured position, but at the same time knowing there's a mum that's missing out on all those special moments as well.
mm,
Um, and yeah, the joy is just seeing the transformation in kids' lives. Our 13-year-old came to us at 7, and had all the what you would read, the trauma triggers of door slamming, running away, um, not the great language, not the best language. And now he's a regular 14-year-old kid, and it's just amazing to see. We sometimes, with our younger one, who's 6 and has a lot of challenges because of his in utero environment, we sometimes have to remind our 14-year-old, wasn't that long you were doing that?
yeah.
But he's just a regular kid now, and that's amazing
Mm.
to see that transformation.
So with fostering, you mentioned before you can have them as a newborn
Yeah.
baby. What's the sort of average you get them just as babies or later on when they're 5 or 6 or 7 or?
So there isn't a definitive
Mm,
average. So it is. So in Australia, the goal is always to not remove children. So there's organisations like all the community organisations that will do intense work with birth families to address those safety concerns so those children don't be removed.
mm,
And I think as Christians, it's never God's design for kids not to be with their birth mum and dad. Um, so if those supports don't work, then they're removed and brought into care. And it can be any age. Um, the as far as I don't know, the best word is probably the demand. Most carers would want a child younger than 2. Um, so whereas where the need is there's a huge need for kids over 7 years old for carers, because there's a perception that they'll be too hard. Um, but that's not always the case. Like in our situation, our eldest foster son, like he came to us at 7, and it's been an incredible transformation. And sometimes those older kids also know the difference. So they know what they don't want in a family. And
mm,
so while they still might struggle, they
mm.
actually want to be there.
It's a really good point.
Um, and I was just talking to one of the lawyers at Child Safety Services locally, and they were saying one of the most heartbreaking things is kids that leave youth detention, and there's no one in Tasmania, we're speaking in Tasmania, that will
Mm.
take them. Like, so isn't that heartbreaking that those
And how old are those sort of children?
so 14 plus.
Mm.
So that's a massive need.
And so what happens to them?
They exit into homelessness,
Mm,
and that's not okay. As a
mm,
society, as a community, that's happening.
mm.
Yeah.
Do you know any of the stats about homelessness for children in that demographic, like
Uh,
between, say, 14 and 18?
Not in the demographic, but for across the board, children exiting care, so children that
Mm,
have grown up in care have a higher proportion of homelessness, not finishing high school, teen pregnancies,
mm,
and interactions with the youth justice system.
mm,
So that's also a big motivation behind my work at Fostering Hope is how to change trajectories of children's lives. So we don't want to just offer a family, we want to actually offer eternal transformation.
mm.
And that's what we're trying to bring. And recognizing that these children, like we talked before, if we think of a cup, they enter life with a cup full of trauma.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to, we're not trying to get them to university. We're just kind of trying to make a little detour in their life so
Mm,
that they're still connected to a family, connected to a church, have a relationship with one adult that's always going to be there for them.
mm,
If they finish high school, that's awesome.
mm,
And there will be some amazing success stories as well.
mm. I mean, the idea of that transformation you're
Yeah.
talking about, I know, becoming to faith in Christ. Can you talk about what sort of freedoms are there if you're
Yeah.
fostering? Are you allowed to, proselytize? Are you allowed to share what's most valuable to you and what has transformed you?
Yeah. So it's a great question. So when you go through that assessment process, we encourage all Christians to be honest about your motivation and your faith, and
Mm,
that's probably a factor in why you're wanting to foster.
mm,
Um, and there is total freedom to take them to church, to pray with them if that's what your family routine is, but we can't be seen to be proselytizing.
mhm,
Um, but however, there's a recognition across the board that Christians make great foster carers. And the studies show the main two reasons people become a carer is altruism and faith. So there's a lot of Christian carers out there. So in a way, it's something the government needs. They need
mm,
us, and we're responding to that need.
mhm.
Um, the main conflict that can come is if a birth parent doesn't want you taking the children to church, and so that would have to be a conversation and a way to respect
Yeah, because
that
what sort of
relationship.
involvement do the birth parents have with their children who are being fostered out?
Yeah, it will vary case to case depending on whether how early on if a child's just removed, the birth family will probably have quite a lot of interaction because that first the way the court systems work is that first period is all about assessing the birth parents and assessing whether they can address the safety concerns. Um, if it goes to a long term order, so in Tasmania and most of Australia, that's an 18-year order or a 21-year order, so child stays in care, then there'll probably be less contact with the birth family, and it's more about how can we have the best relationship possible with the birth family, knowing they're never going to live with them.
Mm,
Um, where so and I guess as a Christian carer, it's my role. Something I can do is offer hope and dignity to that birth family as well.
mhm,
So it will vary case to case. In my situation, my little two have been with us since birth, and their parents actually have a faith. So it's actually been something that's been really a lovely
so
part
you
of
feel
that.
like you're partnering with them?
Yeah,
Mm,
we don't have because of their life. Our relationship with them goes in up and down,
mm.
so we can not hear from them for 2 years and then hear
Wow.
from them. But I know they love that the boys are going to church.
Mm,
With our older foster son, I knew his mum, so he actually went to school with our boys, and so I was trying to support his mum because I knew things were hard. So
mm,
when he was removed, he actually asked to come live with us, and his mum asked if he'd come live with us. So she knew we had a faith, and it was a conversation with her that she didn't like that he would go to church, but she accepted part of him living with us would that
mm,
would be part of it. And if a birth family was really against it, or if it was a birth family of a different faith, then
mm.
potentially a Christian home wouldn't be the right placement, and that would have to be a placement factor.
What percentage of foster carers do you know are Christian?
I
Do
don't
you
know.
know?
I don't know what percentage.
Mm,
There's very little research on carers,
mm,
but I do know there's a lot of them that
mm.
are. Yeah,
Yeah, sorry. I mean, some of these things are difficult, aren't they? Because of
yeah.
the research in it is just not
No,
there. What about financial assistance from the government? So my wife and I want to take on
yeah,
foster care children. We're thinking, oh, what's that gonna do our household budget? Can we afford to do it? Um, just on a material
yeah.
level, Is there assistance from the government?
So in Australia, carers are voluntary foster carers, which
Mm.
means you're reimbursed for the cost of the child. So there's a matrix they use depending
Mhm.
on the age of the child and the level of need of the child, and then you'll
Mm.
get a fortnightly reimbursement. Um, and the idea is that you're not out of pocket
Mhm.
for raising that child. You're not going to make money from it.
Mm.
For some people, it would enable one parent to stay home.
Mm.
Um, what you don't get from the department or from the government is if you need a bigger car because you've taken on,
Ah,
you're not
yeah.
going to get that
No.
support. If you need an extension on your
Mm.
house, and that can be challenging for people.
Mm.
But the financial conversation is never a nice one to have for any
Mm.
of us because you're not wanting to make it, but it's an important. We encourage carers to have the
Yeah,
conversation
it seems
because
like you've gotta really
you've
count
got
that
yeah,
cost. Mm.
yeah, and sometimes there's ways around it. So, um, a lot of carers, Christian and non-Christian, choose to send their children in care to a Christian school or a private school
Yeah.
because kids will often have extra needs, or some of those schools are smaller, so it can be a bit more tailored support. Now, the department can't fund that, but they could increase your fortnightly board reimbursements to cover
Mhm.
the costs of the school fees. So there's ways around that if you can just be open about the need.
Okay, so there's a financial cost, but I would think there's also a relational or emotional cost on a few different levels.
Yeah,
Um, what's the impact you found on your own children? And maybe not, I don't want to just be personal to
yeah,
you. You could speak more
yeah.
broadly.
Um, so yeah, again, it will vary household to household. I'll start with my own children. So um, while like we're a fostering family, and so this is their childhood as well, and it has
Mm.
had a massive impact on their childhood. Their faith is real because of it. They have an incredible ability to look out for others, and
Mm.
like I think would that be there or not, but it's made it real for them,
Mm.
and the way they are. Um, the way they look out for our particular little two boys is just amazing.
Mm.
Both our biological sons in their primary school became the safe kid for all
Mm.
the other kids with high needs. We
Mm.
often joke that our now 14-year-old, when he was in grade 6, I don't think he did much work because he was just sent from
Hmm.
classroom to classroom to look out for the other kids.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, it's a part of their story.
Although it's interesting because I could imagine there's a risk here that they feel like their childhood is being taken from them.
Yeah.
Can you explain how you prepared your children to partner with you? Because it sounds like they were very involved in that process.
Yeah, so we talked to them all along
Hmm.
about it. When the little two came to us from birth, they were too young to really have a decision. But definitely, when our 7-year-old came, they were 7 and 5, and they knew him. So we talked to them about it. And the 5-year-old said at the time, for him, the concept of a kid not having a parent that could look after them, it wasn't even in his world. So he was, if a kid needs a home, of course they should live with us. And I think that's how most of our kids just think everyone's house is like our house.
Mm.
um, so they would, like they say, they'd happily take on more kids. Um, they they've yeah, and we have a very open communication with them about how they're going. Um, Potentially, I've overcompensated in extracurricular activities for them
Ah,
because I don't want them to miss out.
yeah.
So, but that's my
Better to
yeah.
overcompensate.
So they're very active boys that do lots, and I sometimes think, am I just doing that because I don't want them to miss out? But they love it.
Yeah, great.
um, but I think everyone's journey is different. So um, so we started so our first two placements were younger than our children.
Mm.
Um, I've seen carers struggle who have taken placements older than their children. Um,
Ah, right.
and one carer described it
Yeah.
as she remembers they took on a 7 and 5-year-old girl, and their daughter was only 3, and one of her reflections was we were so strict in the 7 and 5-year-old because we didn't know what a 7-year-old could do and couldn't do until their own
Yeah.
child reached that
Yeah.
age.
Yeah.
Um, and they also felt they navigated the teenage years with kids really struggling, and they wish they'd
Mm.
done the teenage years to see what was normal first.
Yeah.
Their journey's been harder,
Yeah.
and a few years ago they would have said they could never recommend fostering to anyone.
Mm.
But they're at a different stage now, and their own daughter, who's struggled with a lot of it, she wants to foster when she grows up.
Mm.
So I think keeping your kids on the journey, praying with them, talking to them about why you're doing it. Respite care is something, again, I
Mm.
think heaps of people out there could be respite carers. So that's giving the full-time carers one weekend off kind of once a month.
Mhm.
Um, and the way we like to frame it among Christians is when you think of a child's not just removed from a birth parent, they're removed from an extended family.
Mm.
So we try and encourage all new carers to think about who's your respite carer from the beginning. So right from the beginning of your journey, who's the person on your team who's going to play that role for the extra children you take in.
And I could imagine too, you as carers need that
Oh,
respite
yeah.
care. So what practical things did you do to refresh yourself
Um,
as a family, you know?
yeah, I think even it's just a time to reset. So watching a movie and staying up later than you normally would because the
Mhm.
little two, in our case, have to be on bed at certain times
Mm.
and they need the structure, whereas the other boys don't need the structure. Um, and so my parents are our respite carers.
Okay.
Um, and that's been an interesting journey because probably like a lot of grandparents out there, they say, "Why are you doing that? What about your own kids?"
Mm.
But they've um, our fostering journeys transformed their lives because they have so much purpose in being there for our little two.
Yeah.
Um, and their relationship with the little two is just amazing. And
Mm.
and what that means when they have the little two, they have it so that on a Saturday or Sunday,
Mm.
if we're driving around the older boys' sport, the little two aren't getting dragged around. But the older boys get that time where we can focus on watching them do whatever they're doing without worrying about the little two.
Mm.
So just that special
Yeah,
relationship.
I mean, I know firsthand your sister.
Yeah,
So their Auntie Jess,
yeah,
is she's very involved.
yeah,
And you can see the blessing. Well, she is to them,
yeah,
but they to her as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
Um, okay, so people listening to us, watching this, are thinking, okay, I'm open.
yeah.
What would be the first step?
First step is to pray.
Hmm.
um, and then something we do as fostering helpers, we run this
Okay.
preparation for fostering devotional,
Hmm.
and we do that every term. This is an American book,
Okay. It's called what is it? Just hold it
reframing
up to the camera.
reframing foster care.
Oh, great. Okay.
And it just asks all the right questions.
Okay.
And because we do it over 6 weeks, so you're prayerfully setting aside that hour, an hour and a half each week to actually ask the right questions, talk with your partner or significant people in your life. Is this right for us, or what's
Mm.
God calling us to do it? And that process you might come to the end of it and think no, or respite care's right, or mentoring's right, or in 12 months' time, or yep, we're ready to go. And then um, we will support people getting in touch with their local foster care agency. Um, and that the way the training works in Australia, it's just like 2 full days, generally 2 Saturdays or something like that. And then you have an in-home assessment where you have someone come into your house, a social worker, who we describe it as post-marriage counselling. They'll ask you all the hard questions. And it's not to trip you up, but it's to check your trauma triggers,
Mm.
check there's there's regular parenting and there's therapeutic or trauma-informed parenting. Check that you're open to adjusting your parenting style for kids that might not relate to traditional parenting styles.
Yeah, because I've got a tricky question to ask you, and
Okay.
that is in this age of childhood institutional sexual abuse, and
Mm.
I think everybody's that I know I am is nervous about doing all things, not only doing them well, but being seen to be doing them well. Um, and particularly with children from coming from traumatic backgrounds, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse. How do you navigate that space when particularly a child's grown up with that sort of trauma?
So um, I actually see this foster care as an opportunity for the church in Australia to do a full um, repentance
Okay.
on this. So
Mm,
we did do the wrong thing. We
mm,
messed up. We've said sorry. Now there's a chance to say, actually, we are the best place to be raising children. God's made these communities and these families. And how can we now show, not with words, not with getting
mm,
involved in politics, but now we can just show the community God's love
mm,
through opening our homes and doing it better than anyone else. by having a church community around us, having a respite carer, having a mentor for our child in care,
Mm.
and show that we're doing it better than everyone else. Making sure our churches are child safe and following. We're about to have new legislation in Tasmania, following the legislation, but also making sure our churches are trauma aware and trauma informed, so that they are safe places. Um, as you say, our children come in with tricky behaviours because of the trauma they faced, and so what we don't want is those kids to then be banned from church, and too many carers stop going to church because they feel their kids' behaviours aren't welcome. So how can we actually make sure our churches welcome those children and
Okay.
understand
Can you
it?
give us some practical examples as to what
Uh,
that looks
yeah,
like?
so I think one of the things we run is trauma informed training. So,
Mhm.
but there's heaps of free ones out there
Oh, I'm thinking even more concrete. Like, what are some tricky behaviors you've seen
that have a
that have been real life uh, occasions where you could just run away in embarrassment, but we need to have the gospel confidence and grace
yep.
to handle? Can you give me some
Yeah.
concrete examples?
Yep. So the words we like to use are space and grace. So we need space for everyone to be accepted and the grace as well. So with my youngest, his behaviours are hard. So I will talk to so practically, I will, if we've had a rough morning before going to church, I will let the kids' church leader know this is what's happening. And I'm always okay. I would rather they came and got me out of church than let him hurt another child. So that that conversation is had. Um, the another There's sometimes children who can't sit still. There's ADHD type behaviours. I've heard of beautiful stories of an older person in the church, just sitting and colouring in with them and doing stickers with them next to them. So it means the
Mm.
carers can engage in the sermon, but they know their person's safe, their little person's safe. Um, Communication's the key. So having the open communication, like there's a lot of talk to a lot about confidentiality in the child safety space,
Yeah.
but I've got to share my child's story to know there's stuff going on, and I need you to know that so you can
Yeah,
offer the
how do you
best
do
care.
that? Because I'm thinking the tricky thing is there's other families in the church,
Yeah,
and your child pushed over my child. Now you've talked to the ministry leader,
yeah,
but what about the other families around you that don't just look at, oh, here comes Mary with her kids,
yeah.
hold my kids a bit closer. How do you include them in that conversation?
Um, so at my church, everyone knows I'm a carer and knows that, so that's really easy,
Hmm.
and there's a real understanding. Something I've done at school is for our youngest. I've done a little booklet about him at the beginning of every year, and it says
Yeah.
all about what's his name, and that goes out to all the parents in the class.
All right.
And it doesn't talk about him being in care, but it talks about some of the issues going on and some of the ways he might do that he responds emotionally, and yeah, so talks about those things, talks about there's some positives as well. He's a brother and he's got 4 brothers and he's got a big brother at the school that'll look out for him. And so that's just created this incredible understanding
Mm.
in just a little government primary school, for there's something else going on for him. And I'm more than happy for any of those parents to come and tell me.
So, Mary, how do you stop him though from being pigeonholed?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And it's something for kids in care who are already coming into
Mm.
life with the burden of being in care.
Mm.
Um, I think you've got to speak on their behalf a lot of the times. The carers are advocates, and I found they only need 1 or 2 friends, 1 or 2 parents that want to get it and make sure they get invited. He gets invited to their birthday party every year, um, and that's all it takes for him to feel like he's okay.
Mm.
For our older foster son, because everyone in the school knew, because he was going to the school already before he was removed. Um, the whole year group got around him when he was removed. But now he's in high school. None of his friends even know he's in care. None of his teachers know until we had parent teacher meetings. So he's gone into high school with just, this is my family and this is who I am.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I think that's not just for kids in care. I think that's for all of us to understand, if there's challenging behaviours going on for a child in a kids' church or youth
Mm.
group, to just take a step back and ask what else is going on,
Mm.
and have a conversation with the parent or the carer,
Mm.
and offer to get on the team with them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that open communication is just so important.
So you're really needing the church to partner with you.
I think for all carers, I like to see carers as local missionaries. They're people in our we send people overseas and we support them and we pray for them. These are people right here in our communities who are living out their faith in their neighbourhoods where God's placed
Mm,
them. So if a church could think of their carers in their church like a local missionary, well, how would they support them? What prayer would they do?
mm,
We've got a lovely, it's quite a small church locally here, and they've actually got 4 fostering families in their church, and they have an elder who's responsible for them.
mm,
And so
mm.
it can be anything. They can ask for financial support, they can ask for meals, they can ask for babysitting, but they just have the elder they go to, and he'll work it out, whatever they need.
Oh, so one of the leaders at church,
Yeah, it's
they
just their go-to person.
oh, that's good. That's
And so
helpful.
that's a model that's how they've set it up, and
Mm,
it's really worked there.
mm,
For other carers, it might be their small group or life group or whatever,
mm,
and they pray with them, and they can talk to them about a tricky period. So the fostering
mm.
journey is also not like raising your own biological kids. It kind of goes in. Life can be pretty normal, and then court comes up, or contact with birth parents increases. So stuff can happen that then can make the journey trickier, and so they can talk to their life group and say, and then get meals for a period, or need help with school pickups or something, like practical things as well.
I can imagine. I love the paradigm that you say that it's a mission field,
Mm.
and the verse that comes to mind is when Jesus says in Matthew's gospel that the fields are white unto harvest, um, but the labourers are few. What are the need for foster carers today? Like, how many children are waiting there in the wings if there would only be X number of foster carers?
The need is huge. So when Fostering Hope has quite a good relationship with the state government here, and the minimum is 30 fostering families a year is what we need to recruit into,
Okay.
um, which doesn't sound like a lot,
But
but
how many are we currently recruiting?
um, we're lucky to recruit 7 a year.
Wow.
And I
So
do
not
have
even a third.
no, and I do have the stats. So I will look here.
Mm,
I was looking for, so in Victoria, so obviously the bigger states are much bigger.
mm,
In one year, 596 carers exited, so stopped their fostering journey, and they only recruited 354 families.
mm,
So that's a huge deficit, um,
mm,
and and shows the need in the bigger states.
mhm.
Um, and what happens is, not that there's children waiting, is children aren't removed, so they're left in unsafe situations, and way too many children in Australia are put in group homes, so where there's 24-hour rostered care, and that's not how we're supposed to be brought up.
Yeah.
Where Fostering Hope sits under CAFO, Christian Alliance for Orphans, which is an international
Okay.
body trying to, and what we're all trying to do is find families for children. So in the developing world, that's closing down orphanages and going to family-based care,
Mm.
whereas here we have foster care already, but we need the
Yeah, God's
families.
design is to be raised in a family, not in
Yeah,
an
no,
institution.
and not rostered carers that there's no relationship
Yeah.
with them. That's not, yeah. And there's terrible stories of that because kids don't know, even for a school to know, who do you call if the kid doesn't turn up at school, or
Mm.
who do you call to get permission for a school photo when you've
Yeah.
just got rostered carers? There's no one person caring for that child.
Now, just a final couple of questions.
Yep.
Uh, Number one, I know adoption is incredibly difficult to go through in Australia and costly. Um, in comparison, is fostering a really, because I would be thinking a lot of people would just balk at the whole idea of
Yeah.
going, it's just too long and cumbersome and difficult. Is that the case?
No, fostering isn't at all. So it's a very quick process to become. So we'd say 6 to 9 months. So like a pregnancy, but
Which is actually pretty helpful
yeah,
to preparation.
yeah,
Yeah.
particularly to prepare extended family and your
Mm.
community. Um, Assessments are happening much more quickly than that now
Mhm.
because the need is so high. So they're assessing people quickly
Mm.
because they're assessing people. I'm talking to new carers. From the time they make the phone call, the person's already thinking, "I've got a child for you." So they're getting those assessments done quickly. Um, and yeah, the really tricky thing about fostering compared to adoption is you are entering a birth family's life. You're
Yeah.
entering the messiness of that and a messy
Yeah.
system.
Mm.
And the media is constantly talking about broken child protection systems.
Yeah.
Um, Currently in Tasmania, we have a rolling 60 vacancies at child safety services. People we don't have the
Mm.
caseworkers, which means situations aren't being case managed and getting the proper care they need.
Yeah.
So you're entering that system that's broken. And I think that's a spiritual thing. Like, God doesn't want these children removed from their parents. So it enters a broken system where you've got, I think, generally really good workers, but they're trying to navigate a birth family that's just had their child removed, who's going through all of their emotions, a
Mm.
child at the centre, and a fostering family who's trying to protect the child.
Yeah.
It's just tricky. And so that's what you're entering, all of that as a carer, whereas adoption, you're not.
Yes.
So that's a big distinction. And the focus is always restoration, reunification in foster
Mm.
care. Um, but you've got to go into it with that frame of
Which is
mind.
a very selfless
Yeah,
mindset to take, isn't it?
yeah,
Like, I'm raising a child to be someone else's child. It's an incredible act of grace.
yeah. And you're loving them for as long as just they need.
Yeah, which
Um,
could be a long or short time
yeah,
too.
yeah. Um, and it's messy, but you also get a feel pretty early on whether a birth family has the capacity
Yeah,
to
okay.
make the changes. Um, and that's not to judge them. It's just to
Yeah, just to
know what's going
understand
on.
reality.
Yeah, yeah. If
Mm.
it's addiction, that's going to be hard.
Yeah.
If it's domestic abuse, I've walked along fostering families who children are being reunified because the partner's in jail, or the mum generally has got the children back, so because she's
Mm.
moving interstate.
Okay.
And when that happens, it's actually beautiful, and a
Mm.
carer gets to walk that journey with that mum who's making those changes.
Yeah.
Um,
And I can imagine in the future when the child's growing up, there'd be
yeah,
lots of great stories of
yeah,
foster kids looking back and
yeah. And sometimes ideal situations, a fostering family becomes the respite carer for the mum. Now that's not
mm,
always going to happen because they're messy people,
yeah.
but there can be some great outcomes as well.
Mm,
Um, Whereas, yeah, adoption, I guess, is a more in Australia. It's still always going to be open adoption, but
yeah.
it's a more clean arrangement. Um, in New South Wales, they do have a model of foster to adopt, so they there's a different set of carers that are the carers who are only the adoption kind of carers. Um,
Mm,
and in the rest of the country, we now have to have each state and territory has to have a permanency framework, which is
yeah.
that there is a way to once to have a permanent outcome for a child. So our eldest foster son, we are his legal guardian. So the state transferred his guardianship to us.
Mm,
Um, so he's still yeah. So we don't have anything to do with child safety now in his life. It's a really simple
mm,
situation. But the fostering journey, you've got to go into it with my understanding, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah,
I've got to take you back to a question,
yeah,
and I will wrap up in just a moment, but
yeah,
I've got to come. You made a comment, and it's just, it's intriguing. You said the church is the best place, or Christians are the best place to foster. Now, that's a big call.
yeah.
Why would you say that? Or how could
Oh,
you defend that? Particularly when there'd be others that would go, "Well, you're not legitimate anymore because of, um,
yeah.
indiscretions and crimes of the past."
Ah,
Why are Christians, in your opinion, best placed to foster?
I think our motivation isn't about us; it's about the child.
Okay.
So I think that's a huge thing. Um, I think we can offer eternal hope. I think we can offer hope and dignity to a birth family. Um, and I think we have a community. So in my work, what sustains carers is often that Christian community around them
Mm.
and connection with other Christian carers. So we connect Christian carers together for support and fellowship and prayer. Um, and non Christian carers don't have that. Um,
Well, it seems to me you've got well, we have got the most higher support of all, and that is God,
yeah,
who labels himself as the God of the fatherless and of the widow.
yeah,
How have you seen personally? This is a very
yeah.
personal question right now, but how have you seen God's spirit, God's grace, his power at work in you as you foster that you've just thought, I couldn't have done that on my own? That was God's
Yeah.
strength right there.
Every Christian carer says exactly that. um, I um, have I in the Little T's case direction, it was really messy for a long time, and I don't think if it wasn't my prayer with God and reliance on God's perspective that they were his children, not my children, regardless of what happened, I would have fallen a few times there. Um, mm, I It's just constant prayer and going back to God and having his hope is greater than my hope, and what I can see as the outcomes. I've got to trust in his outcomes for these
Yeah.
children. Um, the verse behind Fostering Hope's work is James 1:27, to visit and care for the orphans and widows in their distress. And what I love about that verse is it's to visit and care for.
Mm.
It's not to proselytize, it's not to convert, I read one, it's not to make well-adjusted adults. My role is to visit and care for them and trust God with the rest.
Mm.
And that's, I guess, how I try and I think all of us as parents, that's our role as well. They're our
Yeah,
biological
that's a
kids as well.
fascinating verse, isn't it? Because it's the religion that God finds as pure and faultless is to look after the widow and
Yeah.
the orphan. Oh, okay. So if people want to get in touch with you, do they just Google
Yeah, Fostering Hope.
Fostering Hope Tasmania?
Yep, Fostering Hope Community, I think. And
Fostering Hope Community.
Yep.
Okay.
And the Facebook page and we've got a website.
And can they even talk to you personally?
Yeah, get in touch, definitely.
Would that even be a good first step
Yeah,
for them to
definitely.
say, look, I heard you speak. I'd like to talk to you more.
Yeah, definitely.
You're available to talk or meet up? Or,
Yep, definitely. And the other thing we run, I'll just put in there, is a
Mm.
mentoring program. So recognising, again, fostering is a big step. It's all of life. Respite care is a huge need, and I think lots of Christians, again, can offer that extended family.
Okay. And there might even be people watching this that go,
Yeah.
well, look, I can't foster, but I could actually help those that do foster
Yeah,
by offering respite,
Yep.
or even they might have holiday houses or something
yeah,
that they could go away
Yeah.
as a family.
yep. And if your kids if you've school-age kids and your kids go to school and they're friends with a foster child or child in care, offering to be their respite carer, for that child in care, it doesn't feel like they're going to respite. It's like they're just going to a friend's house for a sleepover.
Yeah, no, and look, I've got to say too, in the Presbyterian Church of Australia, I know, and this doesn't get any airtime in the media, but I know a lot of church schools, denominational schools, offer scholarships and very generous bursaries to children in this situation, which you just have to ask, which is a really good thing.
Yeah.
So there's the book as well.
Yeah, so we do that each term. And the other thing is our mentoring program. So
Okay, that's the mentoring program here.
Oh no, that's it. This is a lovely devotional we do with Christian carers.
Okay.
So we do all our devotionals and studies on Zoom. So any people anywhere in Australia can join us.
Yep.
Um,
So lots of resources.
lots of connections. And then the mentoring program is finding mentors for children in care. And where that's so powerful is it's someone who's not paid to look after them, who wants to hang out with them and chooses to be their special person. And it's powerful on every level, for the child, for the mentor, and for the carer.
So just one final thing, and I'm sorry if this is an embarrassing question for you. We haven't talked about this, hand over my heart. If people wanted to financially support Fostering Hope, is that okay?
That would be awesome. Yep.
And again, they would just
it's on the
contact
website.
you and say, I can't foster, I can't do all these other things, but I would love to financially contribute to support the ministry. You'd be okay with that?
I would be very okay with that. Okay. My board would be very happy too.
So you have a board as well.
Yeah.
So there's another layer of accountability.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yep.
It's all above board.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're all above board. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Mary, for joining us.
No, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh, no, it's amazing to see what you're doing, and may God continue to bless you richly in it.
Yeah, thank you.
It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, this has been another episode of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. I hope you've been as encouraged and as challenged as I have. If you want any of the details of Fostering Hope Communities, you'll see it in the show notes at the end of the program. I look forward to seeing you next time.